Hi! Today we're going to talk about power, and I'm specifically teaching this lesson right now in conjunction or in the context of an interpersonal class, but this really applies in a lot of ways, and that's why I'm kind of going over it and giving life to it, give some examples to it, because it's so important in a lot that we do, and I think it's great to kind of understand this dimension. If you ask my mom, she'll tell you I'm always talking about power. She sometimes says to me, "Oh, is it always about power?" Yes, it's always about power. So, this specific text, and I'm currently using a chapter from Pearson's Foundations of Interpersonal Communication. So it's a chapter 1 in a Pearson book, and they lay out 6 different types of power. And the first one that they talk about is legitimate power. And they're specifically using this term to be really logistical. So when you have right by a position and you have power because of that positioning. So in your job, right, you probably have a boss or a manager. When I taught at Concordia for 5 years, I had a director of forensics. I also had a chair. I currently have a chair in the position, so a chair of the department. At Concordia, we also had division chairs, so it wasn't our department chair, but it was of our whole division. So these individuals, just by right of their position, have power. So if they're coming and communicating with me, I'm taking that power into effect just because of their positioning. I often have conversations with my mom about how she has innate power because she's my mom. She doesn't always feel that power, but, because she gave birth to me and she raised me, I always say, you have legitimate power there because of that positioning of being my mom. So any right by position. The second type of power they discuss is reverent power. And this is attractiveness, or when you have, when others want to be like you or desire you. So I one time was teaching a class, it was a few years ago, and they said, "Oh, Mizzo, you're so popular. You're just so cool. Everybody wants to be like you." And they were like, "Tell more stories." And I had this moment because my inner 12-year-old was freaking out. My inner 12-year-old couldn't believe it because I had never been popular or desired as a young person. And now as a teacher who was older and cool and I've done some pretty cool things. I raised a child for a while, and I sometimes pick up hitchhikers, and I have a lot of good stories, and lived by myself and have traveled Europe, and so these students, they had this impact, or they felt that I had this reverent power because they were attracted to that. I think it's important to note there that how that power is used can change. So I like to think of Mean Girls, right? And everybody wants to be like Regina George because she's got a lot of referent power. And she uses that power, badly, right? Whereas in other contexts where people have that, the person who has that power uses it to motivate or as role models. So I try really hard to get people to believe in themselves. And I recognize my reverent power or when I am attractive in that way. And I try to turn that around and say, you can be like that and you're awesome and you can do these things and blah, blah, blah. So I think and not to say Regina George is terrible and I'm awesome. I'm not meaning to compare them. But I have a very clear memory of being on a speech team and being a senior and being the president of the speech team, and my coach kind of pulling me aside and saying, some people are kind of hurt because you and my best friend on the team, her name's Jill. She now has 2 tiny humans and they're adorable. One just sent me a video today telling me that she misses me, which was great. Her name's Iris. She's 4. But anyway, at the time, Jill and I were hanging out a lot, and we weren't aware that we had this referent power. We didn't know people thought us attractive or wanted to be like us. But of course, we were older. We were the experienced people on the team. Of course, we had that power. But, so there's different ways that can be recognized. And I want to point that out. Um, the third type of power they talk about is reward power. And this is when you have the ability to give others what they want. So whether that's tangible, like a treat, I often think of kids, right? And how kids recognize really quickly that adults have the reward power. So whether they're your parents or whether they're Auntie Megan or someone who's watching you or whatever, but think back to how kids will ask, like, can I have a cookie? And they can't get that cookie on their own. Like, you, as the adult, have the ability to reward the cookie. This can also be non-tangible, though, right? It can be social. I love to cuddle. I love to spoon. And I was just saying to my partner this morning, it should be a requirement that on Saturday mornings that we spoon before we get out of bed, or that we get to cuddle. And I can't give that to myself, right? I can't cuddle myself. My partner has that reward power, right? And think about how that applies in your life, right? Who has that reward power? And again, how that power can be used sort of maliciously. I'm withholding this, or how that power can be used or not recognized necessarily. I think of who you want compliments from, and they might not realize they have that reward power. The next one is coercive power, and it's in connection with reward power. So reward power is when you have the ability to give rewards. Coercive power is when you have the ability to give punishment or withhold rewards. This is negative consequences. I was a coach for many years, and this was not I coached competitive speech, and at one point I was coaching a top 20 squad, so we were pretty intent and cared a lot about our competing and what we were doing. And so I didn't like this part, but I had coercive power, right? So I had the ability, if you weren't memorized, I had the ability not to enter you in the tournament. If you didn't do your work, didn't show up to meetings, I had the ability not to coach with you. I could take away the reward of my time and my expertise, my coaching, and not give that to a student if they weren't doing, if that was the consequence. So I had that ability as a coach. And I think that we feel that as teachers, I think as employers, as parents, right? That coercive. And punishment sounds like a big scary word, but I think it's important to note that that could just be consequence, right? That there's an ability to give the consequence. Whereas there are other instances where I don't have the ability to do much. So if I'm in the hallway and someone's being rude, I mean, I can maybe yell at them, but I don't have the ability to punish them. I can't hit them or, take away something from them. Whereas, like, as a kid, I remember at night wanting to read my book, and if I got caught, my parents totally had the ability to take the book away, right, as punishment, or shut the hallway light off, which my sister liked because it kept us not dark, and I liked because it gave me just enough light to read by. Yes, I was one of those kids. Then there's expert power. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's basically when you have enough information or specialized information or understanding that you become an expert. So I've been studying gender for many, many years, and I actually, a former student of mine just texted me yesterday. She's doing a survey, and she had asked all these people how to ask for gender on the survey, but nobody could really help her. They were too worried about her results and how they were going to work out. And so she asked me because she knew that I had specialized or expert knowledge in the area, and I had an answer for her. I've specifically studied how we ask about gender on surveys or on admissions forms or when you're an application. So I had an answer for her because of that expertness. We often think of this in doctors, in judges, right? Those who have that specialized information and they're able to have that power because they've been doing it for so long or they study it so specifically. And then finally, connected to that a little bit is information or persuasion power. So this deals with information and what information you gather or you have, but also how you're able to communicate logically and persuasively. I love Neil deGrasse Tyson. Are you familiar with Neil deGrasse Tyson? He's pretty famous in the science world, and he's I believe he's a physicist specifically, but deals a lot with he redid Cosmos, the show Cosmos, and hosts that, the old Carl Sagan TV show, but Neil deGrasse Tyson often goes to movies like Interstellar or Star Trek, and then he talks about on Twitter or on his blog all the things that the movie did right or that the movie did wrong. And he persuades you as to why. So when Interstellar came out, he persuaded people what Interstellar got right about time travel, which was really cool because he had all of this information. Now, to some extent, that's expert power, right? Because Neil deGrasse Tyson is an expert, but also Neil deGrasse Tyson, there's this great interview with him online where they ask him which is a better spacecraft, the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars or the... Matthew, what's the ship from Star Trek? Or the Enterprise from Star Trek Next Generation. And he doesn't even hesitate. He says, oh, the Enterprise. It's not even a question. And then he logically explains. You should go look this up. It's fantastic. He logically explains why it's revolutionary as far as travel goes and why, when it was created in this science fiction, why it's the best ship that's ever been created in science fiction, and he logically persuades that using information and persuasive tools. So those are the different types of power that the book outlines. And you can see, too, how people can have more than one and how they move back and forth. But hopefully that helps not only with this specific lesson, but also in your life, because you're going to look around now and be like, oh, they have legitimate power, or oh, they're using coercive power in this situation, and you'll know more about that. Have a beautiful day.